Hello, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Randy Braun. I'm an executive coach and a CEO, and the CEO of the leadership coaching and advisory firm Something Major. Welcome to Infertility and Yearning for Working Motherhood. I want to thank you all for coming and looking forward to hearing from you tonight as we take your questions for this important conversation. Something Major is dedicated to empowering working women and working mothers to live their very best lives, feeling more fulfilled, more successful, less burned out, and like they're living and leading on purpose. Speaking of moms, we talk a big game in our culture about being a working mom. But what about becoming a mom? Tonight, as we honor and mark Infertility Awareness Week, this conversation is about replacing that deafening silence in our workplace conversations about womanhood and motherhood and replacing it with a meaningful conversation from our panel. We also want to hear from you, and we'll be taking your questions throughout, so please do feel free to pop those into the Q&A. Without any further ado, allow me to introduce three women I have the distinct privilege of calling our panelists and the personal pleasure of calling my friends. First, I want to introduce to you Dr. Ellen Goldstein. Dr. Goldstein, are you here with us tonight?
Hi, Randy.
Hi, Ellen. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I want to introduce you, Dr. Goldstein, to everybody else. So Dr. Ellen Goldstein is an LA-based, double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist and infertility physician. She has been helping hopeful families at the Reproductive Fertility Center since 2016, and she continues to contribute to innovative research in the field of reproductive endocrinology and infertility. She is currently a clinical faculty and pardon me, tongue twisters tonight. She is currently clinical faculty and attending physician at the UCLA School of Medicine, where she educates the next generation of reproductive specialists. Dr. Goldstein also serves as the physician liaison to the Fate for Kids Fertility Loan Fund, increasing patient and physician awareness of charitable resources for fertility care in the Southern California community. Dr. Goldstein enjoys ushering her patients through the often extremely overwhelming world of fertility care, which we're going to talk about in great detail tonight, with her intuition, empathy, and clear communication. She empowers her patients by making sure they understand their diagnosis and their treatment plan, which is always supported by the latest research. As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Goldstein lives in LA with her two children and her husband, who is also an MD, PhD, an ophthalmologist, and a biotechnology executive. And when she is not taking care of her patients, she enjoys rowing, kayaking, yoga, traveling, and hiking in the Santa Monica Mountains. So Ellen, welcome again. I know I can't wait to hang out with you later this summer when I'm out in Santa Monica.
That sounded a little bit too much like an internet dating profile, but thank you for offering that, Randy.
I love it. I love it. And speaking of internet dating profiles, you might have a match because our second panelist, Stephanie Schwartz, also loves yoga. Stephanie, are you with us tonight?
I am.
Hi, Stephanie. And Ellen, you can leave your camera on. Stephanie leads Little Bean Group, a fundraising consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. She has a passion for relationship building and creating connections, both of which are at the heart of fundraising and certainly at the heart of what we're going to do tonight as well. Stephanie has raised tens of millions of dollars for a variety of organizations and developed fundraising strategies for dozens of organizations. She believes that philanthropy has the power to create and sustain profound change in our society. She launched her firm, Little Bean Group, in 2019 in order to work with organizations and nonprofits that are focused on advocating for key principles and creating change across the country. Stephanie loves to identify solutions that help organizations start, improve, and sustain their fundraising so they can achieve their goals. Her client base is extremely varied, from advocacy and policy organizations, universities, independent schools, and community organizations. And Stephanie tonight is going to share her own journey going through IVF, and we can't wait to hear her insights on that. Stephanie earned a BA from Douglas College, the Women's College at Rutgers, and her MBA from GW here in Washington, where we both join you from tonight. Stephanie lives here in DC, my neighbor, with her husband and her young son. She maintains, like Ellen, a daily yoga practice as well as a daily coffee drinking routine, both of which she believes are key to personal and professional success. Stephanie, welcome again. We're thrilled to have you.
Thanks. So glad to be here.
And Megan Stewart, are you here with us tonight?
Hi, I'm here. It's nice to see everybody.
It's nice to have you. Megan Stewart is our third and final panelist. She is the Assistant Vice President of Membership at the National Association of Manufacturers, also known lovingly here in Washington as just NAM, where she oversees the service, retention, and growth for more than 2,000 member organizations. Before joining NAM, Megan led account management teams at Politico and the Advisory Board, both companies which I had the pleasure of working with her at, where she worked with a diverse portfolio of companies across the Fortune 500, large trade associations, lobbying firms, and healthcare systems, overseeing a multi-million-dollar business portfolio. In 2006, Megan had her first daughter, Rowan, and following the birth of her daughter, Rowan, Megan experienced 3 pregnancy losses while navigating a major career shift from Politico to the NAM. Her family welcomed their second daughter, Sloan, on 02/02/2020 at 20:02. If you can see that all the 02s aligned, an incredibly auspicious beginning to a little girl they wanted for so long. Megan lives in Richmond, Virginia with her husband, her 2 daughters, and her super mutt, Mr. Samuel. Megan, welcome again.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, well, we're thrilled to have all of you, our panelists. We're thrilled to have you, our participants, our attendees. Those of you who are watching us on the recording, thanks for tuning in. And for those of you who joined us live, we want to hear your questions. So feel free to throw them in the Q&A. In the meantime, Dr. Goldstein, let's start with you. I want to kick the first question to you. We do not talk a lot about how normal infertility and fertility challenges are, and I'm wondering if you could kick us off by just setting the stage on how common this is. How many women have miscarriages? How many women are going through IVF and IUI right now?
Okay, good question. There's a lot of statistics that go into this. The number that you probably hear is something like 1 in 8. The 1 in 8 number comes from a CDC survey from 2010 that showed that 12% of all women in this country were having trouble either getting pregnant or sustaining a pregnancy. So interestingly, that number actually includes pregnancy losses, people who have been getting pregnant but aren't able to keep their pregnancies. So really now the more recent data from 2017 is similar. It's like 13% of all women in this country are dealing with this. But that number is kind of an amalgamation of a number of different statistics, because of course it varies very much based on whether you've ever had a live birth before and also how old you are. And so interestingly, the statistic for women who are between the ages of 30 and 39 who are having trouble keeping or getting pregnant or carrying a pregnancy to term is actually close to 25%. And then
wow.
the percentage of women who have not been able to get pregnant at all is actually 19%. So this is incredibly common. Every time you walk down the street, you're dealing with you're seeing multiple people who are in this boat. And it's just very common. As far as sort of how common miscarriage and pregnancy loss is a normal part of every person's reproductive lifespan. And it's considered really completely normal. At least 30% of all recognized pregnancies will end in miscarriage, and it's 50% or more at the age of 40 and above. So really, really common, and something that we're dealing with all the time. Of course, things like recurrent pregnancy loss, more than 2 or more miscarriages is something that we can talk about if people have specific questions about it. But these are just incredibly common. This is my daily life, and it almost, to me, in the world that I live in, it's a surprise to me anytime anyone has an easy time getting pregnant. And I think that what's important for people to understand is when you're dealing with either your friends who haven't had trouble getting pregnant, or even your general OBGYNs who, we love them, they're very busy, they're up all night delivering babies and never seeing their own families. They don't quite see this population of women so much either, because they're so busy with babies flying at their heads all the time that they forget how hard it is for this, like significant minority of their patients to get pregnant.
I love that we're having this conversation and really normalizing this. I mean, I'm personally blown away by those stats. I think what I had heard was 1 in 5, but this sounds like it's even higher. And I know that, the women that I've spoken to, we're going to hear more from Megan and Stephanie, there's so much isolation that is carried in this process, and that's something that I hope that we're going to talk about tonight. And I want to thank those of you who came for joining us. And if you're going through this, Dr. Goldstein, thanks for reminding us that you're not alone. This is very normal, even if it's extremely, extremely painful. And Stephanie, I want to turn to you. You've been my friend for a long time. And for those of you who don't know you, the one thing you need to know about Stephanie Schwartz is, like, she is a planner. There's a chalkboard in her kitchen. It has what's for dinner, like, next Wednesday night. Next Thursday night's dinner is already packed in the freezer. Stephanie, you were such a planner. You had such a plan for how you were going to go grow your career, how you were going to grow your family. And I know that when you started to have a family, things did not go according to plan. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what that journey was like, from having the perfect plan to your IVF journey to have your son Judah.
Sure. So I got married when I was 25 to my college boyfriend. So we had been together for a long time, and I thought, I'm so young. I have so much time before I need to think about starting a family. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm not so into children. I thought, we might be a one-child family. So it was really not on the radar for a while. And when I was 32, so we had been married for 7 years, I thought, okay, now is the time. And I went off birth control. I saw my OBGYN, and we were going to Thailand the next month. And she said, oh, maybe I'll get pregnant in Thailand. So that didn't happen. 6 months went by, and I sort of sensed that something was wrong. I don't know. I just had a feeling. So I went back to my OBGYN, and she said, oh, you're young, keep trying, come back in another 6 months if you're not pregnant. So 6 months later, I wasn't pregnant, and at that point had started with a fertility clinic here in DC, Shady Grove Fertility, to do some tests. And we pretty quickly discovered that my husband has a sperm morphology issue, so meaning that the sperm is misshapen and makes it very difficult to fertilize an egg. So our doctor recommended that we immediately opt for IVF, in vitro fertilization. So a couple months later, we got started with that. And I unfortunately did not respond well to the IVF medications and protocols, even though there wasn't anything to indicate that I wouldn't. So 5 rounds later, we ended up with a number of genetically normal embryos. It was 5 cycles of IVF in 9 months, with 3 failed embryo transfers. So an embryo that we had produced was transferred into me, but it did not lead to pregnancy. I had 1 pretty significant bout with ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which is an unfortunate side effect of IVF. And so 9 months later, we finished, and then it was February 27th of 2017, had my 4th embryo transfer, which then became my son, Judah, who was born in November of 2017. I will say my son is 3.5 now, and not a day goes by that I don't think about the fertility process. I hate to call it a journey because that sounds so whimsical. It's something that weighs on me so heavily, even to this day.
And we're going to talk more about the physical and the emotional toll. Your experiences, we're going to hear from Dr. Goldstein about what people experience with IVF and IUI. I love what you said, Stephanie. It's like, let's stop calling it a journey because it's not whimsical. It's not whimsical. So good push there. Megan, you also have been on a non-journey path, I guess we'll say. You know, and yours was really around secondary infertility, right? You had your daughter Rowan, and then 3 miscarriages before you were able to have Sloan. And I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about what that experience was like.
Yeah, it was, really interesting because I had my first daughter when I was 32 and had a lot of friends who before me who had had challenges getting pregnant or sustaining pregnancies. So I felt maybe ahead of the curve and being aware that it might be more challenging than I expected. So we got pregnant when we started to try right away. And I remember thinking to myself, well, it may not work out, but hopefully it does. And it did. And so I think in some ways I thought maybe not that I was immune to having challenges, but I was like, well, maybe this is just not going to be what happens to me. So when my daughter Rowan was 3, we decided we were ready to try for another baby. And again, got pregnant the first time we tried, and within about 6 or 7 weeks lost the pregnancy. And I was disappointed, but I thought, okay, well, this is my one. This is, my turn to have this. So tried again pretty quickly. Again, got pregnant right away. Again, lost the baby at 6 or 7 weeks. And that time I was really, really sad because I thought, oh no, is this indicative of a really big problem? What's going to happen? So we took a break for a little bit, tried again, got pregnant right away. And again, lost the pregnancy, this time a little further along, probably at 8 or 9 weeks. And at that point I was just really mad because I had been pregnant off and on for such a long time and was super frustrated with the process, and remember saying, maybe I am just meant to have one and this is not something that's supposed to happen for me. So again, took a little break, did a lot of genetic testing to see if my husband or I were, carrying anything that was leading to this recurrent loss. At this point I was 35, and so I was concerned that maybe, I had just gotten too old or something. And my doctor continuously reassured me that she thought it was really a string of bad luck and wasn't anything more serious than that. And we didn't come back with any genetic markers. And so they said, you don't have any trouble getting pregnant. It's just the staying pregnant part that has been challenging. So on the 4th try, we got pregnant again, and this time it worked out and was my daughter Sloan, although it was a very different pregnancy because I had lost so many that they were keeping a really close eye on me. And so I was going to the high-risk doctor every 2 weeks and getting lots and lots of scans. I have tons of pictures of her, which is great. But whereas my first pregnancy had been just about as textbook routine as you can expect, the second time, I was being looked at all the time. And luckily she was born and is perfect, but it was definitely really hard to get her here, and have a lot of empathy for people who go through that, but not just the women, their husbands as well. I think we talk a lot about how the women go through. I know for my husband, it was really challenging in wondering if there was something wrong with him, or if he was, why was he unsuccessful, as men sometimes think about things. And so I think it's really important to talk about how it affects everybody in the family when you're going through it.
And Dr. Goldstein, normalize this again for us, right? Because both Stephanie and Megan talked about the emotional toll. Stephanie certainly talked about the physical toll, and Stephanie, I remember you going through that, and it was no joke. And pardon me, Dr. Goldstein. I call Dr. Goldstein Ellen when we're not in Zoom rooms together with the record on. So Dr. Goldstein, help us understand, what does some of this look like? I know we have some people here who are thinking about that they might potentially have to take some interventions. We have some people here who have been trying and not being able to get pregnant. What's normal?
So secondary infertility, or actually the secondary issue with actually getting pregnant or keeping a pregnancy, so like what Megan was dealing with, the statistic is essentially the same. It's still that sort of 12 to 13% of women who have previously had a previous baby are going to have trouble getting or staying pregnant for the second baby. So that's very, very common. recurrent pregnancy loss is we go looking for issues, just like Megan described, looking for things that could contribute it. We don't usually find anything. There are a set group of scientifically based tests that we do, and if we don't find anything, we do a lot of hand holding and reassurance, and it usually works out. People can and do really go off into the weeds of looking. They want to find a problem, and they go, down this voodoo path that we don't have time to go into right now. But I completely understand, and I will share that so growing up, my parents had 6 miscarriages between the time that I was born and when I was 9 years old. And I remember it. And this is like, I think you're going to find that your fertility doctors, and then like my own fertility story that we're not going to talk about today because my husband's family won't let me talk about it, and it's crazy. But you're going to find that many of your fertility doctors have a personal reason why they go into this. So like for me, it's that I remember my mother having a miscarriage every year when I was a child. So like, it's everybody. This is a normal part of life.
And, part of this normal is the having to go to the appointments and the schedule just being set. And Stephanie, I remember when you were going through your IVF, in an executive level, very high visibility, very demanding, work travel intensive job. And most people who are joining us here tonight are living through this in our pandemic lives, but the world is going to reopen. And what you went through was really difficult. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about how you handled that executive demanding role with the complete unpredictability of like, you need to drop everything and be at the doctor at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Yes, so I approached it as a logistical challenge, which is my strength, and I would block time on my calendar. So I tried to get the 7 a.m. monitoring appointment when they do ultrasounds and blood work. So I'd get the first appointment of the day. And then I would also, as I went through all these rounds of IVF, I would schedule like an extra half an hour that I would call my crying time. So if the results were not good, I had some time to decompress and pull myself together before I went back to the office. I did have a fair amount of work travel, and I tried very hard actually to not be in an IVF cycle when I was traveling as much as possible, but it wasn't always, I wasn't always able to do that. So a couple times, I needed a trigger injection, like a bigger needle that I couldn't really do myself, like back in here. So I was in Boston twice and arranged, I went to an urgent care center and had someone inject me in my tush. So I just tried very hard to think about like, what is happening when, and how can I put that on my calendar and also like build in extra time and extra support. It doesn't work perfectly. I was out of the office for a week unexpectedly with the ovarian hyperstimulation issue, but I think to the extent that you can like block the time as out of office or out of house, that helps. I was thinking about this question, Randy, in light of the pandemic with so many people working from home. And I feel like in some ways it's actually harder now, because when you work in an office, if you're not sitting in your office or at your desk, you could be somewhere else in a meeting, at lunch, doing whatever with other colleagues. But I think there's an expectation that if you're not like sitting at your home office, that you're off doing something personal, and certainly I think more difficult to take sick time. I'm sure we've all read the articles about the blurring lines of the personal and the professional. So I think it's even more important now, if you're dealing with this, to block the time and set the boundaries and be really clear that you're not available. And maybe you're sharing that you're using sick time, or maybe you're just not available.
Yeah, you're just having a private appointment, right? Okay, so blocking time, setting the boundaries, the buffer of crying time, the creativity of I'm on business travel and I need someone else to give me this injection, and I'm going to Google an urgent care I can dependably rely on near my hotel. that's a lot on top of all of the physical, on top of all of the emotional. And Dr. Goldstein, I know you get this question all the time from your patients, right? About, what should I tell work? What shouldn't I tell work? Do you have any guidance? I know it's a deeply personal decision, but do you have any guidance that you can share as people are figuring out how and where to set those boundaries?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'll say that on the doctor's side, I try really hard to be very flexible with how I do my appointments. And so I will be really honest with my patients when appointment time, when, an appointment must be in the morning versus in the afternoon, when I must have labs that day, when it's okay not to. I really don't want to be rigid in those kinds of things. And there are a lot of practices that are rigid. And I think if your practice is too rigid, maybe you should look elsewhere. But as far as what I tell my patients, it's interesting. It's very different from, maybe, and I really feel for Stephanie that you felt like you had to keep this, that you had to shoulder this burden of scheduling this on your own. Because what I tell people is to try as much as possible to be honest with work, because I don't want your work to just think you're being flaky. And I think that if you tell the work that you need these appointments because this is obviously something incredibly important that must be done, we should all be given the flexibility at this professional level to make the time for this in our day, as long as we make up the work at other times.
And, Megan, I know that you went through this as well. In fact, you were negotiating your maternity leave for a new job you had gotten while pregnant, and then had to share with your boss that you weren't even working for, that you were miscarrying. So help us understand what that was like.
It was, one of the things that was probably one of the hardest conversations I had to get ready to have professionally that I've ever had, but also one of the most empowering at the end of the day that I've ever had. So, in 2018, I'd been looking for new jobs the entire year and kind of finally landed on the thing that was going to be right for me at the NAM. And I was really excited because I was really looking forward to working with the person who'd hired me, who I'd known professionally kind of in various circles for some time. And, when I was offered the role, I essentially just found out I was pregnant. I think I was maybe 6 weeks along. And I remember asking the external recruiter, should I say something? Should I not say something? This is going to affect whether or not I can take this job, because I'm not in a position where I can just forego maternity leave, nor do I want to. And I need to understand if they'll be able to do anything for me. And they were really supportive and actually came back to me with a revised offer of, there was a signing bonus equivalent to the additional time I would need, on top of kind of the leave that I would have accrued by that point. They were really fantastic about it. So when a few weeks later, I realized I was losing the pregnancy, I had to come back and say to them, so I'm actually not going to be having this baby, and it's really uncomfortable, but I feel like I need to tell you because this was part of our negotiation. My worst fear was that they thought that I was faking it so that I could get extra money out of them, which is really gross, but I was just worried that that's what they thought. And they were so understanding and so gracious about it. And I remember I told my boss in an email, because I was going to be seeing him for lunch, and I did not want to put him on the spot to tell him in person, not because I thought he was going to be awkward, but because I thought I was going to be awkward and I might start to cry or have an emotional reaction. And I didn't really want to put him in that position because I didn't know him that well. And not only were they really understanding, but they sent me a very large bouquet of flowers to my house to say that they were sorry for, what had happened. And it just spoke volumes to me about the type of organization I was going to. So then a couple months later, when it subsequently happened again, and we were actually getting ready to travel to our board meeting in Arizona, and my doctor had said, you need to be really careful about traveling, because if this happens, you don't want to be in a bad position if you're kind of on a flight and not able to get any medical care if you need it. So I had to tell him, and again, incredibly understanding and incredibly, I don't know if gracious is the right word, but just compassionate about what I was going through. And the thing I think about now is like, you know, this is a very personal thing, but at the same time, you know, if you were diagnosed with diabetes, if you, God forbid, were diagnosed with cancer, like you would tell your work because that is a real health issue that you must deal with. So I think that this should be treated the same way. It is a real health issue that women deal with all the time.
And Megan, I think like we can all like snap to that, right? I saw like our panelists, everyone was like, yes, yes. And I feel like I can hear from our attendees, people yelling yes at their screens. And Megan, I love the way that you tell this story. I'm spoiled because I've had the pleasure of doing some work with Megan and her boss and her team. And seeing the rapport that these two people have, Megan, there's such a closeness that you have with this boss. And it's really, really inspiring to see just how this trust was so established. And I think that the way that he showed up for you is the way that I can only hope that those of you who are joining us tonight who are going through this, that your bosses will react that way. And when we think about what Dr. Goldstein said and Stephanie and Megan, you know, I'm such a proponent on growing your career while growing your family. And Megan, one thing you mentioned in passing, but it's a big deal that we don't talk enough about, is that you were looking for a new job and getting pregnant. You were negotiating for a new job and negotiating your maternity leave. And so if you're joining us here tonight and you're trying to time perfectly when you're gonna get the new job, get the promotion, start the family, maybe you're like Stephanie and you've mapped out the perfect plan and it hasn't happened for you, and so you're holding back from switching jobs or going up for something new, I wanna encourage you, as much as you wanna keep going on this path towards trying to create your family, I wanna encourage you to keep growing your career. There are stories like Megan's out there about how we negotiate our maternity leave. We have from our team, we'll send you an interview that I did with Parents Magazine with tips for doing that. Megan's article that we're going to send you where we did a profile on her for Infertility Awareness Week has her tips. And so want to encourage you to really, really keep going with all of this. You know, speaking of keeping going, and I'm just curious, you know, Stephanie, from your perspective, and Dr. Goldstein, I'd welcome yours as well. You know, what calculus, Stephanie, did you either go through, or Dr. Goldstein, do you usually see when people are trying to kind of time this or game this? And I want to encourage those of you who are joining as well to please throw your questions if you have them in the Q&A. But Stephanie, I'm curious how you kind of dealt with like that growing my career and growing my family dynamic, as kind of the best laid plans didn't work out exactly the way you thought they were going to.
So I had this, what I thought was a great, great job. I was the chief of staff to the vice president of development and alumni relations at George Washington University, and I ran a 250 person, $30 million budget division, like from soup to nuts. And so I felt like on one hand, I had the job, and I had been doing it for a couple of years, about 2.5 years before I started trying to get pregnant. So I felt okay in that regard. But then I felt like once I started fertility treatment that like my attendance was a little spotty, right? And this like went on for a long time. And there were a lot of morning meetings that I would miss. And so I did finally start to tell people what was going on. And they said something like, a couple of them said, oh, I wondered what you were doing because you're always so punctual, and then you weren't here and I didn't hear from you, and I wondered what you were doing. And I said, well, this is what I've been doing, and when I have hopefully some good news to share, I'll let you know. So I do appreciate Dr. Goldstein's point about being upfront with your employer, and certainly Megan's experience as well. And I ultimately was upfront with my boss, the vice president, who was extremely, extremely supportive. And I also relied on a couple of work friends. And, you know, it's like you learn tactics the longer this goes on, and that you need people to cover for you and support you. And I do think you can be quietly open about it and maintain your job and still maintain the level of excellence that you seek by relying on other people at work. And again, I think that is harder to do virtually, but it's the same concept. Like you do need a little village helping you even before hopefully the baby comes. Getting to that point takes a village too.
It's so funny that you say it's harder virtually, because I have so many patients who are like on their Zoom meetings, like in the exam room. So I thought it was easier right now.
And Megan, I'm curious, when you think about how you kind of manage that, what kind of support systems did you have in place as you were going through the job search and the miscarriages? Who did you rely on?
Initially, I was kind of quiet about it. I tend to be a person where when I'm going through something, I don't really like go out to people and want to talk about it. I actually like curl inside myself. And so it was difficult, but I definitely talked to other women who were professional that I felt close enough to talk to. So Randy, you were one of them, and some other women that we worked with at Politico at the time and some other places. And, interestingly enough, my mother-in-law had experienced a loss between my husband and his brother. And she and I wouldn't say we bonded over the experience, but I felt like she had a lot of empathy for the experience that I'd gone through, and understood kind of where we were. And she was really supportive of that as well. And my own mom, who had not gone through the experience, but I think just wanted me and us to be happy. And then, this might sound funny, but if anything, it made me so appreciative for my daughter Rowan. So I think in some ways, as a mother to her, I had more empathy. I was a little more patient, because I was thinking, maybe this is the only one and this is my only shot. So I need to appreciate this time I have with her. So that was its own kind of unique blessing in that experience, and one that I think about a lot when I'm having my moments with both of my kids.
Absolutely. And we know that whether it's miscarriages, infertility, IVF, IUI, a bad day, we know that workplace friendships make a huge difference for women, especially, right? And this isn't just my own opinion. There's fantastic research from Gallup about this. I actually wrote an article about my friendship with Megan, talking about some of this research a few months ago about how workplace friendships, having a work wife, maybe you're lucky like Megan and I had, and you get the same person at multiple organizations and you get to share a desk for years, but how that person can increase your productivity. It can increase the way, if you have a friend at work, the way that you not only have satisfaction, but the way that your boss perceives you and your customers perceive you. And I know now more than ever, so many of us feel so isolated. And so I want to encourage you, whether you're going through something hard or whether you're here because you want to learn or you've been through it before, it's as good a time as ever to really, really invest in your workplace friendships to support, because dealing with this and all the Zoom meetings and just frankly, let's call it what it is, the BS that goes into our work days is exhausting on the best of days, right? And so I'm curious, that's what happens when relationships go well. We also know that when we're going through hard things, people say the dumbest things. They say the dumbest things. And so I'm wondering, Dr. Goldstein, would love to hear what you hear from your patients. Stephanie, Megan, what are the things where maybe we're here tonight because someone in our life is going through this, or someone in our life is going to go through this in the future? What are the things we should not say to people that can be triggering, offensive, abrasive? Like, Stephanie, what dumb thing did I say to you that I shouldn't have said to you when you were going through this?
I don't specifically remember anything that you said, Randy.
Okay, that's for the best.
We have a mutual friend who said something to me that was very hurtful that I have continued to think about. She said to me, "Why do you keep doing this to yourself? Why don't you just have a family a different way? There are a lot of ways to have a family." And I know she meant it from a good place, and certainly she said it at a point where I was physically really struggling, but it was very hurtful. And I said back to her, and it just came out of my mouth, I said, "I'm not old. At the time, I'm 35. I can still have a baby. I just have to keep working on it." I just became so defensive. And now as my 40th birthday approaches, if I wanted another child, I would say to her, the same thing. I could still have a baby, you know. So I think people, they don't necessarily want to say things that are offensive, and they try to say things that are helpful, but that kind of comment is not helpful. But there are, let me just validate, there are so many paths to parenthood if that's what you want to pursue. It just was not right for me at the time.
And, you know, for me, it was interesting. I didn't actually have a lot of people say insensitive things to me when I would open up and describe what I was going through. If anything, I was really happy to see the empathy people showed me. And I think the simplicity of just saying, I'm really sorry that you're going through that, or I'm really sorry that that happened, was like all I needed to hear. But in addition to that, you know, I remember my OBGYN telling me two things that just really, I think, helped and in a strange way gave me hope. The first is that in Washington, D.C., where I was at the time, she said the average age of their first-time mom was 37. And at that point, I was 35. And so that just gave me a lot of hope to think, okay, that's a first-time mom, their average age, because so many women had been working on their careers and we're kind of doing both at the same time. The other thing that she told me is she has 3 children, and she said that she had been pregnant something like 8 times, and that she had also experienced a number of pregnancy losses. And it wasn't necessarily to minimize what I was going through by any means, but just to illustrate the point that, you know, I have a number of children and it isn't always easy. And, you know, I went through this too, and it's just an unfortunate thing that happens to many of us. And so that was also really reassuring to me, in addition to the fact that I think she had her 3rd daughter when she was maybe 40 or 41. And so it just gave me a lot of hope that it wasn't necessarily the end of the road for me. I was just in kind of a bumpy patch of it.
And Dr. Goldstein, what do you see? Because I feel like you just have this bird's eye view on so many different experiences.
Well, here's the one that came up recently. I met someone 2 years ago who was 39 years old, and she was single and she wanted to freeze her eggs. And she then disappeared. I didn't hear from her for 2 years. And she called me back 2 years later and said, okay, here's why you haven't heard from me in 2 years. I was in a relationship and we were, you know, older singles, and we wanted to get married. And so we wound up working with sort of this matchmaker / dating coach to try to help us smooth out our differences and get married. And he told me that I should not freeze my eggs because we were going to get married and try to conceive soon. And also, why would I want to mess with my hormones and potentially drive away this future spouse? And like my mouth fell open, and I said, who is this person? Because I need to educate her. And she goes, oh no, it's not a her, it's a him. And I was like, okay, excuse me, like, you listened to some guy who told you not to mess with your hormones because it was going to drive away a future spouse. And I like all of the, like, everything here, just like, I didn't even like know how to unpack this. Like, this is why are we not listening to the people who actually know what they're talking about? And why are we so afraid of the, like, and I think that a lot of the fear of the hormonal fluctuations and the side effects of this kind of treatment can be ameliorated by a careful discussion with a doctor that you trust. And mindfulness about how it's going to affect you, acceptance of what these different medications do, some care about the protocols, because like there are certain practices where everything is really much, and Stephanie, you're shaking, you're nodding. Shady Grove is like a factory. And so, you know, for example, I don't do my trigger shots with a big shot in the butt. Like, it's okay to do your trigger shot subcutaneously. And I do natural cycle embryo transfers for 80% of my patients so that they don't have to do intramuscular progesterone injections, which I bet, Stephanie, you've done thousands of times in your life. And so like, it's, you know, if you have an honest communication with like a real doctor and not like some matchmaker who is like a total misogynist, I mean, I just like, okay, sorry, that was my soapbox about what not to say to infertility patients.
But I also think, and Dr. Goldstein mentioned this earlier, about sometimes your OBGYN is not necessarily the most informed and best source of information. When I had gone to see my OB about 6 months in trying to get pregnant, she said, oh, we could put you on Clomid, which stimulates ovulation. So if I had gone on Clomid, which can have some pretty severe side effects, that would have actually done nothing to address my fertility issue because there was a diagnosed male factor. And I really appreciate, like, this is a very important specialty with like highly trained people, and you have to see them. And I think if you're questioning, should you do tests, should you see someone, you should, because even if there's nothing that's wrong, like the experts know what they're doing. And even when I had to have my abdomen drained of fluid, I had to have it done at Shady Grove. Like, it's a really specialized procedure, and I couldn't just go to the hospital and have it done. And like the REs, reproductive endocrinologists, really know what they're doing, and they do this all day, every day. And we should listen to them and trust them.
Thank you.
So speaking of listening to the science and listening to Ellen, all roads lead back to Dr. Goldstein. Dr. Goldstein, I kind of have a twofold question for you, which is, if someone is in a heterosexual relationship and they're trying to get pregnant the biological way, when should they come to you if they're not getting pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
And my second question is, when should women come to you when they're thinking about potentially freezing their eggs? I know that we have some women who registered who are single moms by choice. There are some women who registered who are in relationships with other women and are thinking about what their kind of fertility journey is going to look like. When should we come see an RE, or reproductive endocrinologist?
So you should see an RE if you've been trying to get pregnant for a year, if you're under 35, or 6 months if you're 35 and over, or if there's an obvious concern that you have that makes you think you're going to have trouble getting pregnant. That's irregular periods, a history of chlamydia or pelvic inflammatory disease, a history of endometriosis, anything you're worried about your partner. Has he tried to conceive in the past and hasn't been able to cause a pregnancy? Does he have a urological history, undescended testicles, surgery? Is he on any major medications? These days, waiting for a year seems like a long time for our sort of type A kind of high-powered people. So yeah, it is supposed to be a year if you're under 35. But that was the first part of the question. Sorry, what was
Yeah, so unless we have any pre-existing conditions, about a year. And then what should we be thinking about? I am thinking about becoming a single mom by choice, or I'm in a partnered relationship, but I'm partnered up with another woman, and so we know we're going to have to go through some kind of IUI, IVF process to get pregnant. Right. When and how should we initiate those conversations with someone like you versus our run-of-the-mill OBGYN?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of misinformation out there that the OBGYNs will give you, unfortunately. As much as they're very good at what they do day to day, they're not up to date on this stuff. Really, the best for freezing eggs, egg freezing is a personal, emotional, social, psychological decision that you should make based on your family building goals. And so you might need to hash that out with a fertility doctor. And the medical part of it is just details. So you need to understand the medicine, but make that decision. Nobody can tell you whether you must freeze your eggs from a medical standpoint. And so the thing is that there's two different ways to think about egg freezing. There's a cost effectiveness analysis, population-based analysis, which is that at age 37, if you're not getting ready to get pregnant anytime soon, that's the most cost-effective time to freeze your eggs, because if you are single at 37 and you're going to need, then there's a high likelihood that if you start thinking about family building at 39, 40, 41, that your 37-year-old eggs could be helpful to you. However, there's a significant proportion of 37-year-olds that are already going to have unsuccessful egg freezing cycles if they wait that long. long to do it. So the question is, do you care more about the population-based analysis versus what's going to be the most likely to be helpful for you, which is under 35, like age 32 to 33. However, if you wake up on your 36th birthday and you want to do this, like that's not too late. Like you didn't do it at 33, well, let's get on it. Like there is no, at some time around age 38 to 39, I'm going to start having a conversation with you based on your specifics of your medical history and your egg reserve. Do you want to consider trying to get pregnant on your own rather than freezing eggs? Because egg freezing is not a guarantee. And at least if I'm trying to help someone get pregnant on their own, I have an answer every month as to whether this worked or did not. And do I need to move on to something else, as opposed to if I freeze eggs, all I have frozen is hope, possibility, and statistics, and not an actual baby.
And I think what this has really illuminated, Dr. Goldstein and everyone else, is that this is such a set of personal decisions, right? Like Stephanie, you went to Shady Grove, a bigger practice, love Shady Grove. We have Judah to show us the thank you, the gratitude to Shady Grove. Ellen, you run a much smaller practice, right? And I think that, as with everything in life, this is such a personal, Stephanie, I'm catching myself now and using the word journey. This is such a personal experience.
I don't like
right,
that word.
For each person. Okay, so we're ditching journey. It's too whimsical, right? But it's such a personal experience, and whether it's someone like Dr. Goldstein who works in a much more boutique kind of a practice, or a bigger practice like Shady Grove, which is really the gold standard here in Washington. I know so many people who have had just really positive outcomes there. This is really, really personal. Megan, it sounds like you had a great experience with your run-of-the-mill OBGYN, though we understand why REs are so specialized and so valuable. So to close us out, I want to just go around and hear from each one of you. We've had such a wide-ranging conversation about fertility and about everything that's involved with our fertility experiences, not journeys. And so Megan, I'll start with you. Just to kind of close us out, what is one thing you wish that we talked about or knew, just as a final thought when we have this conversation?
Well, I think going back to the concept of growing your career and growing your family and not putting the brakes on one in favor of the other is just know your worth. Because if you find that you are interviewing for a job while you're expecting, or you're interviewing for a job and you become expecting, you've got to feel really confident that it's going to work out. And if that job really wants you, they're going to find a way to make it work. They will. And so you should not take your foot off the gas for any of it, because it will find its way to work out.
Absolutely, and stay tuned. Megan, maybe you and I will do another conversation about negotiating your maternity leave. So, and we'll definitely send that Parents Magazine article around to everyone. But yes, thank you so much, because that's such an important push to keep going, keep negotiating. We can't do that enough. Stephanie, I'll offer you what you wish people knew, and then Dr. Goldstein, I'll give you the final word, and I will close us out with some announcements about how we can all keep in touch with each other from here.
Someone gave me the advice that the emotional toll is greater than the physical toll, and I didn't of fertility, and I didn't really understand that until I experienced it, and I think that is true. And I had a pretty rough physical experience, and when the emotional toll is so challenging, it permeates everything in your life: your relationship with your spouse or partner, your friends, your community, certainly your work. And so I would just offer that if you experience that it's so important to take care of yourself and to figure out what you need in order to get through the workday, get through the family event where you're meeting your new niece or nephew. Like, think about coping mechanisms and people you can rely on and depend on, both personally and professionally.
Such sound advice. Dr. Goldstein?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that everyone else has already said. You have to put yourself and your family and your needs first. I remember when I was in my last year of fellowship training at UCLA, my co-fellow, my work wife, you talked about work wife, she really was, we were both going through IVF at the same time. And she kept trying to like get me to like plan our embryo transfers so we wouldn't be out at the same time. And I was like, no, like we have to do what's right for ourselves. And we wound up having babies 3 weeks apart. And like, you know, look, we didn't get much time off in fellowship anyway, so they dealt with it. And you just have to keep putting yourself first, and work will fall into place. This is a marathon, not a sprint. You have to work with a person that you trust and that will help you keep moving forward. I think you always have to be making forward progress. And even if the forward progress is a break because you need it for your own physical or emotional well-being, that's still forward progress because it's what you need. You shouldn't be wasting time because you can't find the right resources, or you can't make it work for your life, or, you know, because that's valuable time, and time is eggs.
Absolutely. And I love what you said, and it's a great closing thought about put ourselves first and everything with work will follow. I can tell you that advice is sound for every woman everywhere, in making sure that we are caring for ourselves so that we can be not just successful in our careers, but feel fulfilled in our lives. And so I want to thank you all so much for coming. I want to thank those of you who joined and share opportunities for us to keep the conversation and connection going. First of all, we're going to share Dr. Goldstein's awesome Instagram account, and you can follow her for lots of tips and lots of insights. I also want to invite you. I know that we have some Something Major regulars here tonight. I know we have some folks who are new to the Something Major family. I want to invite you to a few upcoming events that we have. So this coming Tuesday at noon, we have a Let's Do Lunch series once a month, and this Tuesday is our April session. We'll be sitting down with Erin Schultz, women's wealth expert and financial literacy educator, to talk about how we go about marrying our money to our goals. And Dr. Goldstein, I hear IVF is expensive, so I invite you all to join us for that. In May, I'll be sitting down for Let's Do Lunch with Dr. Sierra Kaler-Jones. Dr. Jones is a public speaking coach and a storyteller, and we're going to be sitting down for a conversation about how we can own our message and speak with more confidence. So feel free to join us there. I think we have those, and we can pop those links into the chat. We'll certainly be sending everybody a follow-up email with all this information. Again, I want to thank you so much. I'm Randy Braun. I'm an executive coach, the CEO and founder of Something Major, a women's leadership and advisory coaching firm. Again, I want to thank you. These conversations, everything we do at Something Major is all about helping women live and lead on purpose. I see Brittany just posted a bunch of ways where we can get in touch. Tons and tons of free resources. So be in touch with us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.